All right, why don't you go ahead and get started, Katie?
Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to kick things off with a few words from Supervisor Horsley. Nope.
Oh, he has to be on.
Oh, never mind. I will get things started.
Here we go.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Thank you very much. I want to say good evening and thank you for joining us for the final event in a series about Connect the Coastside. We want to thank you for your participation and openness to providing feedback and shaping the plan. And as a reminder, many of the proposed ideas in Connect the Coastside are really not new. They were really also presented in the Highway 1 Safety and Mobility Improvement Study from 2010-2011. That study was a collaboration between the County of San Mateo, Midcoast Community Council, and a consulting team, and is available on the county's planning website. This has been a long-term planning effort, and we are committed to identifying safety and mobility solutions. Now, community feedback is also critical to this process. And so again, thank you for participating and for joining us in this presentation and discussion. And now I will turn it over to one of our really fabulous young planners, Katie Faulkner, and she is a member of our planning and building team and has done really a fabulous job on these presentations. And this is the third one. I think you will enjoy her presentation. I certainly have as well. Katie?
Thank you, Supervisor Horsley. Really appreciate that. So we're here today to continue the conversation about Connect the Coastside. And this is the third meeting that we planned out of three. The first meeting talked about the overall goals of the plan and the recommended projects. The second meeting focused on Moss Beach and Montera projects. And tonight's meeting focuses on the communities of Princeton, El Granada, and Miramar. And will be an opportunity to specifically discuss the transportation projects proposed in those areas. And we want to hear from you which mobility improvements are most important, what might be missing from the current draft of the plan that we could add, and then we want to take that feedback and update the plan. So now I will introduce you to a few more of our Connect the Coastside team members. We have Debbie Schechter, you've already heard from a little bit today, who is our lead facilitator. Hi, Debbie. We also have Joe Leclerc on the meeting, and he's our planning manager, and Shonda Singh, our senior transportation planner, and they'll be helping us answer some questions a little bit later in the presentation. And so now I will hand it over to Debbie to talk about our agenda for tonight.
Thanks, Katie. As Katie said, I'm Debbie Schechter, and I'm the facilitator for tonight's meeting. So what that means is that my role is to guide the process of the meeting so that you all can listen to and participate in the content of the meeting and share your experiences. Katie already explained that the purpose is for you to learn about Connect the Coastside, the plan, to have a conversation with each other and to share what specific transportation projects you would like to see and what you feel like is missing from the plan. We know that some of you are very familiar with Connect the Coastside and others of you are learning about it for the first time. And so this meeting format and design is really an attempt to balance the interests of all of you so that you all can participate today. So our agenda today is we're on the welcome. We're going to go over some group agreements in a minute. Katie will give a presentation on the plan and specifically the projects in the 4 communities, Princeton, El Granada, and Miramar. After the presentation, we will have time for some brief clarifying questions. We won't have time to take all of your questions, but we do want to see all of your questions either in the chat. You can raise them later in the breakout groups or in a post-meeting survey. You'll hear more about that. And you can send me your questions in the chat. We will have community conversations in breakout groups. So we'll have about a half an hour for you all to share your thoughts and comments on the plan and the projects in breakout groups. and the notes from those groups will be recorded, or there will be notes taken from your comments in the breakout groups. So you'll have a note taker who will be capturing your ideas, and you'll be able to see that as that happens. Each of the groups will then do a really quick report out just of some of the major themes that they've heard. We'll talk about next steps, and then we'll close the meeting at just about 8 o'clock tonight. So that is the plan for tonight's meeting. I do want to mention the fact sheets that are on about the projects in Princeton, El Granada, and Miramar. Many of you have seen those already. I also have posted them in the chat, so you can refer to those during the meeting if you like. So our group agreements, we come up with these in order to help the meeting run effectively and to ensure that everyone can participate and share their ideas. So we ask that you speak from your own experience. So what you have experienced about transportation on the coast side, we know that there's a lot of experience here. We want to hear about that. We ask that you listen for understanding, knowing that everyone has a different perspective and a different experience, that you respect those differences and be curious, that you let everyone participate, and that you allow the facilitator to guide the process. So if people could give a thumbs up or a nod that they can follow those today, that would be great. Thank you. Also in the meeting, normally if we were in person, we might have a break, we might have some food. We obviously can't do that here, but we would ask that you do what you need to do to take care of yourself. We know that these Zoom meetings can be draining, so do what you need to do to take care of yourself and have a productive meeting for you. We also ask a little bit for your patience as we deal with the technology. Every meeting we learn something new. And so I imagine we'll learn something new today about the technology. To get started, we just wanted to do a quick poll and find out where folks live or work on the coast side. So I'm going to launch the poll in a minute. So this asks, where do you live and or work on the coast side? If you live and work in 2 different places, this poll will allow you to do that. So the choices are Princeton, El Granada, Miramar, somewhere else on the coast side, or somewhere else not on the coast side. So we'll give you about 10 more seconds to respond to this poll. All right, I'm going to end polling. And I'm going to share the results. So it looks like more than half the folks on the call today live or work in El Granada, 54%. Almost a third other coast side, and just a couple of folks in Princeton, Miramar, and other. So thank you. That tells us a little bit about who's here today. Appreciate that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Katie for the presentation. I'm going to send a message to everyone in the chat so you know if you have questions during the presentation, please feel free to send them to me, and we'll have time at the end to answer a few of them. So thank you.
All right, I'll take it from here. To give you an idea of what you'll hear in this presentation, I will provide a short overview of the plan to give some background to anyone who's new to this planning process. And I apologize if this is a bit of a repeat for anyone who attended previous meetings. I'll review some of what we've heard so far from past outreach and from the past 2 meetings. And then I'll go into some detail about the projects proposed for Princeton, El Granada, and Miramar areas. And then finally, I'll give a short explanation about how this plan will be implemented. So this effort was originally born out of the last update of the local coastal program, which for reference is a set of policies that's used to guide development on the coast while still protecting coastal resources. And that update included a policy that called for the development of a comprehensive transportation management plan to address the traffic impacts of development on roads and highways in the Midcoast. So when I say comprehensive transportation plan, I mean that it covers the topics of walking, biking, taking public transit, driving, and also land use. The plan looks at existing conditions, makes estimates about future conditions, and then recommends projects to improve mobility. The benefit of Connect the Coastside is that it creates an overall vision for transportation on the Mid-Coast, and it clarifies the priorities for future investments in transportation. And another added benefit of looking at all these topics in one plan is that we can coordinate our recommendations to make sure that all of these modes of travel work together. So for example, if we can make improvements that give people the option to walk or bike to their local destination, that could in turn help ease some of the car traffic that's experienced on the coast. And one other thing to note is that there are some other related planning efforts that you might have heard about, such as the Active Transportation Plan or Plan Princeton. And while I won't go into too much detail right now, in the interest of time, I will say that we are working to make sure that all these plans complement one another and build upon each other. Okay. So on the screen now is a map that shows the planning area for Connect the Coastside. And that planning area is shown in purple. And this is where Connect the Coastside has recommended projects. The planning area includes the unincorporated areas surrounding Highway 1 and Highway 92. And the orange color on the map shows our traffic analysis area, which helped to provide the background information used to make some of these recommendations. So in particular, this plan focuses on the unincorporated Mid-Coast, which is shown on this map. And for reference, when I say unincorporated, I mean the parts of the county that are outside of a city's boundaries. So for example, Half Moon Bay is an incorporated city, while Princeton, El Granada, and Miramar are all unincorporated communities that are served by the county government. Right, now I'll talk about what we've heard so far. So the Connect the Coastside planning effort was originally started back in 2014. And the work leading up to today included quite a bit of public outreach and feedback. And from all that previous public outreach and feedback, we heard a few different themes emerge about what's important when considering transportation improvements. And distilled down, those things are improving traffic, increasing safety, increasing transportation choices, increasing sustainability, providing access to the coast, and preserving mid-coast character. And as we've been going through these meetings, we've been hearing those same things echoed, and all those things are what Connect the Coastside is striving to do. So the May 30th virtual conversation was focused on the overall plan, and we got a lot of great feedback from those discussions. And on the screen now are just a few of the many important points that we heard discussed at the overview meeting. We heard from people about the kind of changes they'd like to see. And they said things like projects to decrease traffic, better solutions for people walking to get across Highway 1, continuous sidewalks and bikeways, and for the plan to address things like evacuation and emergency response, bike share, on-demand transportation, and age-friendly improvements. And at the June 15th, we also heard people talk about all those things I just mentioned, and a few additional things stood out to us as well, including an interest in what projects can be implemented in the short term, adding projects that address speeding on residential streets, improving street lighting while still preserving mid-coast character, completing the parallel trail, and express and frequent bus service to where people work. And again, those are just a few of the many points we heard. And we will be putting together a report that incorporates all that feedback from each of the 3 meetings. And we anticipate releasing that report in July. Okay, let's move on to projects. So we've heard some questions about how the Connect the Coastside project ideas were generated. And the answer is that they come from a variety of places. Most of these projects come from ideas or concerns that we heard originally from the community. And as Supervisor Horsley said, a lot of these projects also were carried over from other planning efforts, like the Highway 1 Safety and Mobility Study. And some of the projects were added to fix a specific problem found by the traffic analysis. Okay, so on the screen now is a map that shows the locations of the projects currently proposed for Princeton, El Granada, and Miramar. And this map includes things like proposed parking improvements, improved signage, additional and improved pedestrian crossings, new bike parking, projects to add more space for biking, filling in gaps in the sidewalk network, making improvements to Highway 1, completing the coastal trail, and building the parallel trail. So now I'll talk about those projects in a little more detail. Okay. So right now, there aren't a lot of options for traveling between the different communities on the Mid-Coast. And we've heard from residents that for a lot of people, the only feasible option is to drive. But we've also heard that a lot of people would like an alternative to driving. And there'd be a lot of benefits to that, including helping to reduce traffic. So the plan recommends building the multimodal parallel trail on the east side of Highway 1 to connect Montera, Moss Beach, El Granada, Miramar, and Half Moon Bay together. The trail would be separated from Highway 1 in order to provide a safe way for people to walk and bike between these mid-coast communities. And actually, the first segment of the parallel trail, which runs from the border of Half Moon Bay to Coronado Street, has actually already been approved for a coastal development permit and is in the process of getting an encroachment permit from Caltrans. So that one's already started moving forward. So to make it easier and safer for people to walk, we're recommending the installation of additional crossings on Highway 1 and also along the parallel trail route and on neighborhood streets. We recommend that new and also existing crossings have high visibility striping and, where appropriate, pedestrian activated beacons, which could look something like the pictures shown on the screen now. Okay. So currently, many of the bus stops in the Mid-Coast lack benches and shelters. And we've heard that they can be hard to get to because of lack of sidewalks and lack of marked crosswalks. So to make it easier and more comfortable for people to take the bus, we're recommending adding benches and shelters and installing crosswalks and sidewalks in areas that lead up to bus stops. And if we can make it easier to ride the bus, then it might take some cars off the road and help improve traffic. So right now, Highway 1 throughout the study area is made up of inconsistent roadways and lane widths and narrow or non-existent shoulders. So Connect the Coastside recommends creating standardized, safe roadway designs along the populated areas of Highway 1. And this standardization would happen in two different zones. The Village Zone would be located in an area that starts at the border of Half Moon Bay and continues to the south end of Capistrano. And it would include creating curbs and gutters to define the roadway edge and also ensuring consistent lane widths of less than 12 feet to slow motorists. And the Fringe Zone, which would run from the south end of Capistrano to the north end of Capistrano, would include adding valley gutters to help define the roadway edge. And this recommendation is an example of a project that came from the Highway 1 Safety and Mobility Study. So part of the Highway 1 redesign would also include adding striped bike lanes to Highway 1 to create space for people to bike to their destinations. So the top picture on the screen is an example of another area of Highway 1 that has a striped bike lane running alongside and a parking lane beyond that. We're also recommending adding bike parking so that people have a safe place to store their bikes when they make a stop. We recommend improving the safety of intersections and roadways by adding stop signs for drivers, pedestrians, and cyclists. And the plan also recommends adding wayfinding signs to help people find important community locations. So Connect the Coastside recommends completing the coastal trail from Montara to Half Moon Bay. So currently there are some parts of the coastal trail route that are already improved, like the Jean Lauer Trail, which runs through the Fitzgerald Marine Reserve. But the coastal trail also runs along some county streets that don't have any pedestrian or biking improvements. For example, Princeton Avenue. So completing the coastal trail could include making some of those county roads friendlier places to walk and bike, potentially by adding sidewalks or shared bike routes. Okay, Airport Street. So right now, Airport Street doesn't have any bicycle infrastructure on it, but people bike on it. And so we've heard that it needs improvements. The plan identifies a few different possible improvements for Airport Street. One option would be a separated bike trail on the east side of the street. This option would require building bridges over wetlands in the area. A second option is a striped bike lane with a sidewalk in the developed areas of the street on the west side of Airport. And a third option would be a shared lane bike route. And we would need some additional study to determine the best option, and we'd want to also consider the parking needs of this area when making any changes. Capistrano Road is another area that could use some bike improvements, potentially by widening the shoulders and adding shared lane markings to create a safer bike route. And an example of shared lane markings is shown in the corner of the presentation. Okay, so right now the downtown area of El Granada doesn't have a complete sidewalk network. And there are sections of the road leading to Wilkinson School and El Granada Elementary School that also are missing sidewalks. One example is this part of Coronado Street shown on the screen. And we've heard from people who live in the Mid-Coast that traffic can be pretty bad around school drop-off times. And one solution to try to lessen traffic is to create routes along which kids and families feel comfortable walking and biking to school so that they don't necessarily have to drive. So we recommend building new sidewalks and crosswalks to create continuous walking paths. The plan also proposes to build a parking lot at the south end of Etheldor and Highway 1 that would make it easier for commuters to use public transit during the week and provide parking for recreational visitors on the weekends. This multi-purpose parking lot would include green infrastructure and bicycle parking. And we have a few additional parking improvements on top of that, particularly in El Granada at the Surfers Beach area. So Surfers Beach can create demand for parking in this area. And currently people park along the side of Highway 1 or in the dirt lot that exists between Highway 1 and Avenue Alhambra, both of which are shown in these images on the screen. We are proposing improvements to this current situation, including creating a formalized parking lot between Highway 1 and Avenue Alhambra. And here's a map that zooms in on Surfers Beach and that downtown El Granada area to show all the different projects that are proposed in that area. And I'm showing this image because there are a few different things going on in this area, including a future park proposed for the Burnham Strip. So figuring out the exact location of parking improvements in this area will take some additional study and also coordination with the different agencies involved in this area and also the public, of course. And so that's something we'll recommend in the plan. And we're thinking that if we can move parking away from Highway 1, where a lot of it is right now, into a formalized parking lot, that could improve highway traffic because then people wouldn't have to slow down on the highway to look for a space and try to parallel park. And that brings me to the end of our proposed projects. So I want to talk a little bit about how this plan could be implemented. So let's hypothetically jump forward a little bit and imagine that this plan is all finalized. So how would these projects be implemented and how would they be paid for? So one thing to note is that these projects won't happen all at once. They will be implemented over the next 20 years or more. And some projects will happen in the short term, some in the medium term, and some projects will take longer to complete. The plan currently has a project evaluation system to prioritize these projects and the timing of these projects based on the factors listed on the screen. And I will note that we want to update this evaluation system to incorporate the feedback we receive at these meetings to help prioritize the projects that we hear are most important to the community. And over the years, these projects will be paid for with a mix of county funding, federal, regional, or statewide grants, and a proposed transportation impact fee that would be imposed on new development in the area. One recent example of how transportation improvements are funded is the segment of the parallel trail that has recently been approved for the coastal development permit. That project is funded by a mix of local grant fund sources, including a Transportation Authority grant and CCAG grant funds, and also Measure K funds, which are from a San Mateo half-cent sales tax. And so I hope that helps clarify some things, and that wraps up my presentation for the moment. So I'm going to hand things back to Debbie for now.
Great, thanks, Katie. So we have time to take a few clarifying questions, and I have received a few in the chat. So I'm going to ask some of these questions. So one of them has to do about pedestrian crossings over Highway 1. And the question is, when it comes to pedestrian crossing Highway 1, why is the go-to a simple crossing over a very busy street? Have you considered paths over the highway that are safer for everyone and also don't inhibit the flow of traffic?
I can answer that one, but also Joe and Shonda, feel free to jump in too. So that is something we've heard a lot, and I think, you know, one of the main reasons is, or one of the reasons is cost, but you know, an over or under crossing would cost cost quite a bit more than an at-grade crossing. But Shonda, I think she also might have an answer to that one too.
Yeah, I'm trying to unmute Shonda right now.
Here, let me take a crack at that. There are places where it may be possible to build a overcrossing where the grades are conducive, but Katie's right. Cost is a consideration, but also visual impacts. I think that one of the driving principles behind this plan is to really respect the character of the coastside. And although these are, as you point out, a very safe way to get people across, because people have to make the vertical trip to get up on top of the bridge and the vertical trip to get down off of it, it sometimes discourages folks from using it. And there's also the visual impacts of a big structure on the coastside. So those are some of the reasons why we've not put that sort of thing in the plan.
Thanks, Joe and Katie. So we have a couple of questions that have to do with traffic, and specifically traffic on the weekends. And so one of the questions is, what is in the plan to improve traffic? How is the overall plan addressing the increasing amount of tourists that visit the coastside every year? And then related to that, are there any plans to introduce alternate roads for people in Montara to access Half Moon Bay without getting stuck in Highway 1? So kind of three questions in one about tourist traffic, what's being done, and then the idea of an alternate road.
So I can start, and then, Joe and Katie, please feel free to jump in. We've heard this concern before, and I think we're going to keep seeing visitors coming to the coastside. So we're continuing to explore and put into the plan conversations with Samtrans about increasing transit service and exploring shuttles, which I think were previously there. And I think part of what we're hoping to include with the park and ride lots is really to encourage parking once and using other modes of transportation like biking and walking and transit once people are on the coast side to help relieve some of those trip chains. And we heard at the last meeting, also a desire for express bus service or transit service to BART and really to help with commute times and commute traffic. In terms of adding roadways or roadway capacity, I think there's certainly some physical challenges with that in terms of road right-of-way availability. But there's also the phenomenon that typically when roadways are expanded, more people are going to drive, which just leads to more traffic congestion, and it's called induced demand. So that's been sort of shown for many places, and so I think that's why we've steered away from just, we can't really build our way out of congestion. So providing people with that true alternatives can really help with that traffic congestion problem.
Thanks, Chanda. We have a couple of questions asking, where would the multi-purpose parking lot be located?
As Katie pointed out, we're not certain yet. We need to conduct a community-based planning process, working with the Granada Community Services District and others to explore the possibilities in the area and to arrive at a solution that really meets with community support, that's affordable, that avoids environmental resources in the area, and provides the kind of access that all the different users in the area need.
I'll just add to that. I talked about two different potential parking improvements, and that multi-purpose parking lot right now in the plan, it's kind of called out at Etheldorn and Highway 1 at the south end of Moss Beach. And one of the things we want to hear during this phase of outreach is really like, is that a good location? Is there anything else we should be considering? Would people use that? So I hope that helps answer that question too.
Thank you. So we also have a question about, do pedestrian crossings help with traffic?
So I can start also with that. Yes, they definitely can help with traffic flow. I think what we've heard and is that people are crossing at lots of different locations along Highway 1 at lots of different times. And so the idea of hopefully channelizing people to one location will make traffic a little bit more predictable for both drivers and people walking. And depending on the type of final crossing design, they can also be timed with signals that are already there. So that's something we can, we're continuing to explore and want to make sure that it works for as many users as possible.
Thank you. I think we have time for a couple more questions. So let's see. This is about the parking area between Highway 1 and Avenue Alhambra. So if a new parking area were created there, would parking also be banned along Highway 1 to minimize pedestrian crossings that disrupt traffic flow?
Well, again, I think that that's our idea at this point, that it would improve traffic flow in the area if the cars were not located along Highway 1. But I think that the demand for parking in this area is tremendous. And so we need to look at all the real estate that we have available for both, recreational park uses, for parking, and for trails, and fit all those things together in an elegant way that that meets the needs of all the different users in the area and improves safety and traffic flow. So we believe that eliminating the parallel parking along Highway 1 would improve traffic flow. And that's really a big concern that we've heard a lot in this study.
Okay, I'm going to take one more question, which is, why do we need wayfinding signs? what's the purpose of those?
So,
Well, wayfinding signs are intended for people who are unfamiliar with the area that they're visiting. So sometimes even people from San Mateo County may not have been to a particular place before, and to benefit from wayfinding information. But also, you know, there's a lot of visitors to the Coastside, and their ability to make quick decisions based on good signage could also improve traffic flow by preventing them from stopping in the middle of the street trying to figure out what to do next.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to take one more question because this is related to the parking area between Highway 1 and Avenue Alhambra. I don't know if this is a misunderstanding or a good question, but the question is, will there be bathrooms and changing areas in this park between Highway 1 and Avenue Alhambra?
So, you know, the park isn't actually something that's in Connect the Coastside. It's a separate effort that's going on with the Granada Community Services District. So I would refer those kind of questions to them. And I know that's an ongoing development, that new park, and planning for it.
Right. Thanks for that clarification, Katie. So if we weren't able to get to your question, please be assured that we are capturing all of them, and you will have an opportunity to see responses to all of the questions later when the county produces a full meeting report that has answers to all of the questions that were asked. So at this point in the meeting, we are going to transition into small group conversations in breakout groups. And the idea of the breakout conversation is for you to be able to share your perspective on the plan, and specifically these two questions. So the first one is about which of the projects discussed today for Princeton, El Granada, and Miramar are most important to you, and which projects are most important to encourage you and others to walk, bike, or take transit. And then the second question is, what else could be done to improve transportation options in this area? Or what do you think is missing from the plan in these areas that you would like to see? So the way this is going to work is you will be put via the magic of Zoom into a breakout room with a facilitator, a note taker, and hopefully a total of about 4 participants. You may be in a group where you may have a listener from the MCC, and they'll identify them as such. I want to acknowledge our volunteer facilitators from Peninsula Conflict Resolution Center, as well as some county staff who will be helping out. You will be in breakout rooms for about 30 minutes. And you will be put into them automatically. So again, this will be an opportunity for you to share your perspective on these questions and to hear from others. So with that, I think that we are ready to put you into breakout rooms. And just after that, you'll come back, we'll hear a report out, and we'll talk about next steps. So please stick around for that. We appreciate it.
30
Yes.
minutes?
30
Okay,
minutes,
great.
yes. Thank you. Is everybody back? We think so. Okay, well, I hope everyone had a good conversation in your breakout groups, that you got to share your ideas and that you got to learn from others. So with that, I'm going to ask your facilitators and note takers to do a brief report out, just some of the key themes that were shared in your breakout groups, and just to know that all of the notes that were taken will be captured and shared with all of you, with the public, and as part of a meeting report. So today we're just asking to hear just a brief summary of some of the key ideas that came up. So I'm going to ask, I have to unmute folks, and I'm having a hard time doing this. I'm trying to unmute Ida and Lisa, and for some reason I'm not able to do that right now. Whoops.
They might have to accept unmuting. Maybe that's it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think I'm
Sorry.
David, and Lisa is unmuted. Great. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, I apologize. My dog is barking in the background. But I will go ahead. We had a very small group, a little bit of technical difficulty, but we had, despite that, a very lively conversation. And the person who we were talking to had a lot to say. She happened to have lived on the coast for 25 years. And so knows it very well, was concerned primarily about traffic, has seen it increase in the time that she's lived there, and would like to is in favor of anything that will help reduce the traffic, including improvements that will facilitate bike and pedestrian travel, especially, and more buses during the school hours to, a lot of the kids could take the bus if there was better and more service. And so that was kind of the main points. Yeah.
Great. Thanks very much, Ida and Lisa, and participants in your group. So next we have David and Katie.
I'll be reporting out. Sorry, my cat is doing things in the background. If you guys can hear that, my mom cursing at him. So we had a relatively small group. We had 2 people. And one of the concerns was with the California Coastal Trail and the Parallel Trail being part of an age-friendly community, if they will be wide enough to accommodate people on 3-wheel bikes. And there was also a concern about roundabouts causing more traffic congestion. And then as far as the pedestrian crossings go, the members of our group felt that pedestrians will cross wherever they want to, regardless of if there are new crossings added, and that might cause more of a traffic problem, especially if there is a parking lot addition. That might focus pedestrians crossing in a big mass in one location. And I think that pretty much covers it from our group.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, David and Katie and your group. So next we have Jerry and Will.
Hi. Well, we had 3 people in our group. And all 3 were long-term residents in the El Granada area. They were very well aware and involved in politics and this process. They pretty much all respect the coast, want to respect the coastside. They don't want to see a lot of urbanization. There was a big concern about the pedestrian traffic at Surfers Beach and how people have been killed or injured in the past, and how dangerous it is. However, the idea of lights or more crosswalks was not something that anybody was interested in. They had ideas about moving the parking to be closer to the light, putting the parking on the side of the street, on the west side of the street, and closing off the east side of the street, and other alternatives to having people walk across the street. And if they're going to walk across the street by the light. There was interest in beach buses on the weekends and parking possibly at places like El Granada School or the Harbor District. There was a split over underpasses, although I think everybody would be interested in learning more about that, and over bike lanes as well on Highway 1.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Jerry and Will's group. So next we have Nicole and Joe.
Yes. We also had a great conversation. There were 4 folks in the group. I think the areas that folks would like to prioritize, or that we agreed would be good, are things like the biking trails, the walking trails, and then solving some of the key safety issues. We talked about the parking lots, and we had some differences of opinion around that being a solution, but there was definitely important conversation about some challenges in Miramar in particular with on the weekends, lots of people, not enough parking, trash, and just trying to figure out how to solve that. We had a number of things that folks thought were missing from the plan, but the one that I will emphasize that got talked about a lot was at least one person, and I think a few in our group, would really like to see much more of a conservation focus environmentally friendly, focus on wildlife integrated better into the plan.
Great. All right. Thank you, Nicole and Joe's group. So next we have Beth and Chanda.
Sure, I'll do the
Chanda.
report out for our group. Hi, Beth. So in terms of projects that people thought were important, I think addressing pedestrian crossings is a big theme in our group. So, making sure there was a crossing at the Coastside Market in Moss Beach, and then discussion around challenges walking in that Alhambra Avenue, Surfers Beach area, especially with the parking being closed. So really thinking carefully about where a pedestrian crossing might go there, if there's a parking lot there. And then in Princeton, really a big emphasis on just adding more crosswalks, more high visibility marked crosswalks. Just paint is the mantra that we heard, and especially along Princeton Avenue. I think also we talked about bicycle facilities going from Princeton Harbor and Hoffman Bay as a priority. In terms of things that are missing, we had a good discussion about coordination with other jurisdictions and other entities like Coastside Sanitation, and really clarifying how all of those entities come together to create a comprehensive long-range vision. And that, as drafted right now, Connect the Coastside might not be meeting that really long-range vision. And a really great suggestion to bring all those groups together so the public can interface with all of them at once to understand who has jurisdiction over what.
Great. Thanks very much, Beth and Chanda's group. And so last we have Jackie and Kelsey.
Sure. I'm happy to share that we had a great group of longtime residents from Moss Beach, El Granada, and Montera, and we had an MCC observer. We had agreement among the group that there were a lot of traffic pinches, especially in the areas between El Granada and Princeton, crossing over to Surfers Beach, and then also a little bit crossing to Sam's also. Idea is on the Surfers Beach end to remove the roadside parking on one to potentially reduce traffic. We heard concern about the parallel trail through Princeton. The area, wasn't built to accommodate kind of that infrastructure. We also heard about unsafe crossings on the intersection of Coronado, Santiago, for both residents and for both drivers and pedestrians. Mainly, concern that, some really unsafe crossings are around schools. And lastly, we heard concern about the location for the multi-use parking lot and just the remoteness of the location. And that's all for our group.
Great. So that's all the groups. Thank you, Jackie and Kelsey's group. I really appreciate hearing all the comments, and I hope you all learned something from hearing just a taste of what came out of all of the groups. I heard that there are a number of projects that people are interested in. There are some projects that people are concerned about, as well as other new ideas that people had, some really, really interesting and exciting ideas. So thanks everyone for participating and for your feedback. Just a reminder that the whole notes will be captured and made available to you. Also, if you felt like you didn't have enough time in your breakout group to share all of your ideas and comments, there's a couple ways that you can share those. There will be a post-meeting survey, and Katie will mention that in a little bit. And also she'll share her email, I believe, and you can send her comments via email. And so thanks again, everyone. And with that, I'll turn it over to Katie to talk about next steps.
Share my screen quickly to talk about next steps. So we just did the report out. And hopefully everyone can see that, just to check. Okay. All right, next steps. So this is a high-level overview of the process for completing the plan. So currently we are in a phase of doing outreach for the public draft of the plan, and we anticipate wrapping up this phase approximately at the end of July. And then we would be in an update phase where we would incorporate the public feedback into the plan, and we anticipate it to last from August to November, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a moment. And after the public outreach and update processes are complete, then that's when we begin the final draft review process. And that part would include presenting the plan to the Mid-Coast Community Council, the Half Moon Bay Planning Commission, the San Mateo County Planning Commission, all for their recommendations. And then the very last thing in a process like this would be to take the plan to the San Mateo County Board of Supervisors for them to consider approval. And we anticipate that final review phase to take place from approximately this December to February 2021. But I will note that this timeline is just an estimate right now, and it could change depending on future circumstances and what we hear from the community and decision makers. And it's just to give you an estimate of where we're going, but it's not completely set in stone. So I want to go into a little more detail on what I just said. So I'll talk about some of the activities that are in this outreach phase. So tonight wraps up the third of 3 virtual conversations. And like Debbie said, we're planning to release a report that summarizes the feedback that we've heard. That'll come out in July. We'll also post the raw notes from tonight on the website, and that will just take a few days, maybe a week, to get together and get it on the website. And we will also continue doing some additional Spanish language outreach and youth group outreach on top of this. And we are also looking at an additional presentation to the Mid-Coast Community Council to provide some more in-depth information on the projects proposed for Highway 92 and the proposed land use projects that are in the plan. And so we can send out an invite to anyone who's on our interested parties list when we get that finalized. And just to go into a little bit more about that update phase that I mentioned. So in that phase, we would review all the feedback we've received from the outreach phase, which includes this meeting, and we would create a list of potential updates to the plan. And these could include things like refining recommendations, adding new projects, adding new information, tweaking other projects. And we would present these proposed updates at a study session with the Mid-Coast Community Council as kind of a check-in to make sure that we've got things right and we understood what the community was telling us. And at that point, if we kind of get the go-ahead to go forward, staff would then take some time to make updates to the plan. And then once we have that updated plan, it would be presented again to the Mid-Coast Community Council and also at a Planning Commission workshop. If we hear, more public input from the public and decision makers, then we could make some more changes at that point, and then we would proceed to the final draft review phase that I mentioned earlier. So that's just, a bit of an outline of where we think we're going to go, and so I hope that's helpful. Okay, so like Debbie said, after this meeting, I'll be sending you a post-meeting survey where you can share your feedback on today's meeting and also share any additional thoughts you have about Connect the Coastside. And that brings us to the end of the meeting. If you have any questions or feedback, please feel free to reach out to us. My email's on the screen. It's also on the website. We'd love to hear from you. And please visit the Connect the Coastside website for a lot more information, including the draft plan. And also there's a box where you can submit comments online if you prefer to do it that way. And I just want to thank you so much for joining us and listening to our presentation and participating in our group discussions. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot,
Thank you,
Katie.
everyone.
And in the past, we've gotten questions from people asking about can they get copies of the presentation? Will that be posted on the website?
Yes, the presentation, the PowerPoint will be posted on the website, a recording of the presentation will be posted, and the draft notes will be posted on the website. And that just takes us a few days to kind of gather all that stuff together and get it off to the website folks.
Great. Thanks, Katie. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you all for coming. Have a good evening.
Thank you.